Judo is dying. We finally reached the stage where on a global level, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu's taken over, and I want to find out why. To some of you Jiu-Jitsu practitioners, that might seem extremely obvious, but basically because of the Olympic Games and the Commonwealth Games, Judo's been hanging on in there for a while. So I want to see exactly why Jiu-Jitsu is much more popular and if there's anything that us Judo players can do about it. I've been doing Judo now for the majority of my life, and for me there's not many better feelings than throwing someone through the air against their will. I think it's the perfect combination of skill, strength, speed, agility, balance, and it's basically just like play fighting. Probably worth mentioning that there's still loads of countries where Judo is more popular than BJJ, even European countries like France, for example. There's also quite a few instances where it goes the other way. For instance, in the US, Jiu-Jitsu and Judo have been going in opposite directions for years. I was actually most surprised to see that in Japan, the home of Judo, Jiu-Jitsu is more popular in terms of search terms there. I guess it is also the home of Jiu-Jitsu as well though. Also should be said that this is just search term data, it's not accurate for participation in either sport, but it gives us a good indication of how popular the sport is by people, how often people are searching for it. I think one of the main problems with it for me is that Judo just isn't that fun to watch at a high level. If you don't really know what's going on, it just looks like they're spending a long time fighting for grips, which isn't that fun to watch unless you know what they're doing and want to know what they're doing. But then BJJ does suffer with some of the similar problems where they have sort of like 3-hour long submission only fights, but then they also have really amazing events like the most recent ADCC. It was like a really big spectacle and actually fun to watch, and there was announcers and a big crowd, and they have things like open weight divisions and super fights and tournaments for money and lots of other things like that just make the spectacle a lot more entertaining. So the second issue is participation in adults. I'm a 27-year-old black belt and I'm at my judo club where I come every week, and there's not that many people for me to train with without going too far away, just because there's not that many people around my age that train that have been as training for as long as I have that aren't really good. Don't get me wrong, there are definitely places I would go, but normally there will be elite judo setups where everyone will be a lot better than me, or it will be sort of fighting teenagers or people coming through the ranks at my own club where there's a bit of a skill gap the other way as well. So usually clubs like mine work on a voluntary basis, which normally means they rely on people like us to come and help with the mats, and because of that most of us can't help really more than one time a week. That just doesn't seem like enough to me to keep people engaged. My local jiu-jitsu club does at least 10 classes a week between no-gi and gi. You don't have to wait a whole week between sessions in order to practice what you were working on last week, and you also don't have to be traveling an hour to go to different clubs and find different places to train. It's all there every week. For me, that just keeps me much more engaged. I'm much more likely to think about jiu-jitsu off the mat because I'm constantly going on the mat and practicing those things. The last thing, and maybe the most important point, is that I don't really think that judo is seen as being that cool. Whereas in jiu-jitsu you have advocates from lots of people in the UFC are practitioners, you have celebrities that are doing it, you have people like Joe Rogan that advocate it on their podcast all the time. But with judo there's not many advocates that I can think that are celebrities. I mean, even as a judoka that's done it for like the past 15 years, I can't think of anyone that is an advocate for the sport. Well, a good advocate for the sport. So, what can judo do about it? As you can see from the trends that we see big spikes during Olympic and Commonwealth cycles, which makes sense, but we need a lot more of those events throughout the year in order to keep the interest around judo going. Now, the IJF does stream the major judo events throughout the year on YouTube completely for free, which is great, but in reality, if you're not looking for that, it's not really going to find a new audience. It's just going to find people that are already interested in judo. Personally, I think we should try and encourage professional judoka to compete in things like Polaris and Grapple Fest, the jiu-jitsu events that are going on throughout the year that already have quite a lot of eyeballs on them, and also those eyeballs are different to the judo audience, so it allows us to grow. A bit like the old school sort of UFC offense, you could even pitch it as judo versus jiu-jitsu, and I think that would do wonders for both sports, to be honest. Some of the most exciting jiu-jitsu events that I've seen recently have featured Owen Livesey on them. So he's a former Commonwealth judo champion, and his fights are exciting because he's literally launching people across the mat. You're constantly wondering like whether he's going to be able to throw this other person or whether they're going to dare stand up with him, and it's really exciting. And I don't think that's just because I'm interested in judo. I think he's doing big numbers in the BJJ scene just because people are excited to see him literally launching people. I should probably add that he is also a jiu-jitsu black belt, so it's not just like a direct judoka going up against jiu-jitsu guys, he is also very good at jiu-jitsu too. But you also have people like Fionn Davis. She came from a judo background. She recently was the first ever British person to win the ADCC championships, and she featured some good judo along the way to do that. There was a lovely Koshi Garuma in the semi-final fight. Again, she's obviously not just a judoka, and she's very skilled in jiu-jitsu and a jiu-jitsu black belt too, but there are elements where their judo is coming through and you're seeing them throw people, which is exciting. So if we could get some of those professional judoka to come and compete in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu events, not only will it be great for their own personal brand because they'll get lots of exposure with a load of other grappling fans that potentially haven't seen them before. That will do wonders for the sport, especially if they're exciting and they're throwing sort of high-level jiu-jitsu athletes around. And then also they'll probably get paid, which is a different video sort of entirely by itself. We need some more full-time centres as well, where adults can go and train all the time, even if they're not an elite judoka. I also completely understand that people doing that now might not even be able to make enough money to run a full-time adult judo centre that isn't elite, but maybe there's some sort of compromise. Because a lot of jiu-jitsu clubs are doing that, we can get judo instructors in there to help with that syllabus, and then the students there get to learn both judo and jiu-jitsu at the same time. I actually teach a judo session myself at my local jiu-jitsu club, and in my head that's like a nice way of giving back to the judo community potentially, and getting lots of people that are interested in grappling and submission grappling as a whole potentially hooked on judo. I have found that some of those guys will come up to me having watched the IJF judo tournaments at the weekend, and I think that is like another sign that it is still interesting for people that are interested in grappling. So lastly, the rules. So a lot of judo players have a lot of things to say about the rules, and I do definitely agree to some extent that I think some of the older rules, like removing leg grabs and things, were definitely detrimental to the sport. I do, however, think they've done a good job with more recent rules, including more shidos and penalties, in order to sort of spice up the judo and allow for more throwing. But I definitely think there's more that we can do. Or even if they left it exactly as it is for the IJF circuit, maybe they could start introducing like supplementary tournaments where they have a completely different rule set where it encourages throwing even more. Or maybe they can do things like no-gi judo, which I imagine has been ruled out in the past due to it being similar to wrestling and us being able to keep our Olympic status. As much as it's pretty sad to see judo's trend dropping off a cliff, it's also pretty exciting to see another grappling martial art that is so similar in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu rapidly growing. I think that's only going to keep growing as well, and hopefully with some small changes to judo, or maybe some big changes to judo, it can drag itself along with it.